Hi there, my name is Oliver Hansard, one of the co-creators of the Lawyers Coach podcast. If you listen to our first series, you will know that each episode features myself or Claire Rayson trying to find out what makes lawyers tick. Our second series gets underway on the 7th of September, but before that, we are treating you to a special crossover episode. It features Harry Clark, host of the brilliant More From Law podcast. So why do we call it a crossover? Well, not only will you be able to find this very episode on Harry's podcast channel, but also both Claire and Harry will be asking each other questions, a position they don't normally find themselves in. Claire started by asking Harry why he decided to choose a career in law in the first place.
I think really at the crux of it, it comes down to problem solving. Really, I really like problem solving. I think that one of the first times I got to experience what lawyers do, other than images of them arguing all the time in court that you often see on TV, was a sort of short work placement I did, and it just involved a personal injury case where someone was trying to claim that they, there weren't any road markings at where they had the accident. That as a result, they weren't liable, and ended up me going onto Google Maps and using Google Street View and sort of recreating what happened through that, and then also kind of correlating that with the legal side of things and putting it together with a solution as to what had happened. So I think to me it's just the idea of problem solving and digging down as to what is going on in a given scenario, and then giving that feedback as to what to do to a client or party. I just find that really interesting.
And you're at the stage of your journey, I know you're just finishing off your LPC and about to embark on a training contract, and you do your podcast More From Law. So I'm just really interested as to why you started that and what the thinking was behind it.
I started kind of blogging and writing and putting myself out there publicly, I guess, about 12 months ago. And that really just came about a bit by chance. It was a bit of a kind of a freak of accident how it happened, in that I just made a small post on LinkedIn, which was admittedly a platform that I had never used before, and was actually looking to delete it from my phone for the purposes of getting some space on it. And it just really resonated with people, and I saw that there was a real need for students and other aspiring lawyers who are wanting to break into the profession to learn more about the training contract process and what university is like and all that sort of thing. And ultimately, I kind of realized the more that I talk to students that access to career services and insights into law, or the ability to talk to lawyers, can be a bit of a postcode lottery at times based on what your university provides, for example. And I'd been fortunate enough to be able to speak to lawyers from other jurisdictions and other countries at that time based on my own networking efforts. And I just thought, well, if I can do my best to try and sort of pay this forward and to disseminate this information that I'd learned myself, and to at least tell people about the mistakes that I made and all the time that will hopefully save them, then that's what I would do. And I think my sort of overarching aim with the podcast and everything else has just been, well, what would I have really appreciated 2 years ago, when I was midway through university, for example, and doing my best to create that and to provide a really accessible insight into just how big the world of law really is.
And I guess it's kind of resulted in, you having your own personal brand. You're obviously kind of well known now. How do you feel about that?
It's been a bit of a surreal experience at times. I still find it really strange when people use my last name, for example, in full. But no, it's also been really enjoyable, and it's been really enlightening for me, and it's really helped kind of challenge my perspective about the legal profession, and kind of opened it up to more voices, more backgrounds, more different types of roles, and everything else within the profession that I honestly didn't know existed beforehand. So I've really gained a lot of value out of it in that regard as well.
And what's been the most interesting thing that you've learnt?
Oh, good question. I think I would have to say just the differences between the UK and the US in terms of the legal education timeline of a lawyer and how their kind of development process goes through. So I know in the UK, we're starting to experiment a little bit with kind of these more innovative modules and teaching styles, trying to emphasize the kind of skills development and the fact that, lawyers need to be good at their research skills, obviously, but also all those front of house skills and negotiation and interviewing, all that stuff as well. And then comparing that to what's going on with the US at the moment with their bar exam, the fact that in the middle of a pandemic, they're still forcing people to, in some states sit in these, really stuffed rooms full of candidates. Everyone has to wear suits and do things that way. Just really fascinates me is one way of putting it.
And you're just about to embark on your legal career in a firm. What kind of hopes, expectations do you have going into that? And do you think that those have changed as you've been doing your podcast and reaching out and talking to people that are kind of further on in their careers?
Since I've been talking to lawyers and since I've been learning more about the profession, and particularly since I've been learning more about the business side of law, so not just, you know, the black letter law side of things and the practice areas and whatever, but the actual way that firms will innovate and provide their services to clients, I've seen my kind of focus shift more towards the tech side of law and how, you know, law and technology is going to intersect. I guess the expectations, I think you hear all kinds of horror stories, students going into university hear horror stories about that, and likewise on the LPC and then onto the training contracts. But from the most kind of practical advice I think I've been told from nearly everyone who's been through the process is to keep an open mind. You know, I'm going on the record and saying all this stuff now about what I do and don't like, but, you know, it's very likely I get in there and I'll find something else that interests me or whatever. And also just to learn on the job. You know, I think it makes me laugh sometimes the number of times I speak to associates or trainees who are sort of set to qualify and say that, you know, the LPC or law school, whatever it is you've done before, is useful to a degree and that will teach you some of those skills like we were just talking about. But a lot of it is the case of having to get used to how this firm does things and getting used to picking up the skills you'll need regardless of what department you're in and how that will change as well. So I'm excited, but yeah, I'm also a little nervous, as I'm sure you can imagine.
And in terms of kind of choosing firms, I just want to ask you a bit about that, because I think, you know, there's always a lot written about, you know, and again it makes me sound old, but, you know, kind of your generation and, you know, how millennials don't want to work for a firm whose values don't align with theirs, and they're looking for a bigger purpose. How true do you think that is?
Yeah, good question. I'm sure, you know, I'd hesitate to speak as the spokesperson for Gen Z or anything else, but at least I think in my eyes that some of the things that you've identified as also being prevalent when you're applying, you know, the characteristics of the firm and internationality or anything else, and the caliber of the work you're doing is obviously still going to be resonant. I think if anything, perhaps with younger generation, the fact that we've grown up with technology and we've clearly seen as a result of coronavirus how remote working is, at least, you know, in the short term, plausible and doable and workable for a lot of firms. I think it's going to be a sort of a slight shifting of emphasis on values. I think from what I can tell in my experiences of speaking to students and a bunch of surveys I've seen done of people sort of my age, there's a greater emphasis and desire on this the so-called work-life balance and the ability to you know, work flexibly if need be and be able to sort of have more control over your sort of working commitments and so on. But at the same time, I don't think that that's representative of everyone, and I'm sure that there will be individuals who instead are much more focused on the ability to get a real sort of professional career developed through secondments or the ability to, you know, liaise directly with clients and throw themselves at the deep end and everything else. So it's been really interesting to see everyone's responses with everything that's going on with COVID and how it's kind of impacting on different generations. And I think the main thing, you know, I surveyed a lot of students when the pandemic first broke out, and I think the main thing is just anxiety, if anything, and not necessarily just over the job market and the economy and everything else, but obviously at this sort of stage of your life and your career, you're contending with a lot of other things as well. It's trying to get on the property ladder, or at least finding a place to rent when you're doing everything professionally. It's your education and the kind of disruptions that we've seen there. And then in addition, the career prospects of being able to secure and develop a career with everything that's going on in this market, really. So I think if anything, it's people are just wanting to find some sense of security in what they're going to do and an ability to hopefully prove themselves to an employer or otherwise.
And it's interesting, isn't it, around that work flexibility, because it's something I think, you know, that's probably true of all generations, that, you know, you want to have that work-life balance. And actually when you start at a firm, you know, I think certainly if I look back at my experience, you end up working, you know, long hours, you know, and you're not in a position really to turn around and say, you know, actually I want to work flexibly and I want this work-life balance. Do you think Gen Z rather than millennials makes me seem even older? But do you think Gen Z are going to be any different? Do you think they're going to say, actually, you know what, I could be doing this remotely? Why are you making me stay here at 1 in the morning when I could be doing this, maybe still at 1 in the morning, but I could be doing it at home?
Yeah, I think the views will probably still be the same, their desire to do so. I think the biggest difference that will happen this time around, if that conversation happens again post coronavirus, is the fact that the partners and the decision makers and everyone else amongst the firm will have experienced this directly firsthand for themselves, and will have experienced what this remote working is like. And yeah, I fully understand that there's a lot of lawyers I've spoken to who are desperate to get back to the office, and from when I've spoken to them for that, the vast majority of it is due to the social element of being able to work with colleagues and so on, and whatnot, being able to do that. But I think the fact that partners and everyone else will have experienced this firsthand will hopefully have come as a learning experience as to the fact that this is a little bit different from the kind of articles and speculations that we might have read about. But then again, I'd caveat that by the fact that this is not a usual working from home experience, and that I'm sure that there will be many people who have gone through this period of the last 6 months or whatever, turned off from the idea of remote working, because it's not really been remote working. It's been remote coping with kids and everything else that they might have going on at their home.
I think the other thing that your generation will have that mine kind of was really only starting off with this, makes me sound old, but the internet was only really coming in when I was at university, and we certainly didn't have social media like you do today, or podcasts or any of that stuff. So actually, I've worked in marketing in firms as well as a lawyer in a firm. And I think the generation coming up are going to be a marketing team's dream, but actually probably also a marketing team's nightmare, because with everyone kind of almost doing their own thing anyway and having their own brands, it's going to be an interesting dilemma, I think, to work out what you do with that.
Mm. Yeah, no, I'd agree. And I think the one thing that's always kind of intrigued me, I guess, about the way that firms, at least traditionally, have been marketing and speaking to students is, a lot of young people and students, they obviously prefer various social media platforms, and obviously TikTok is crazy at the moment, and YouTube, and the kind of visual element and the idea of building that real personal connection with the person they're speaking to and engaging with is, I think a really kind of key component of what interests them. But then if you look at the way that firms will try to advertise to students, it's through law fairs and career fairs. It's through coming in and giving presentations very akin to lectures for for an hour or two on what their firm does, and they just both strike me as quite student unfriendly environments, with the fact that they're very nerve-wracking, these law fairs. Like I remember my first one, and when you're in your first year and you don't know your contracts from your torts and everything else and your trust, seeing all of these international huge firms worth millions and millions and billions of pounds rocking up on your campus and saying, oh, apply to us, and have a career with us. It's certainly an experience, and it's certainly quite intimidating. And I guess what I'll be really interested to see is, going forward, like you say, how firms will adapt and explore these new avenues that this digital age has provided to us, and whether there's already firms that have started to pull out indefinitely from doing careers fairs and things anyway, because they're also quite an investment for the firms. They have to spend money getting people to travel up and potentially stay somewhere overnight if they're doing a tour of universities and go around speaking campuses. It all takes a vast amount of time, and if you can get that same level of reach through spending 2-3 hours recording and editing a podcast and distributing that to thousands of people anyway, I guess it's going to be a shift of priorities in terms of how you allocate your time, your resources. I guess, Claire, given the fact you've been in the marketing side of law as well, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, and whether you think the world of career fairs and in-person lectures and everything else are going to go away and give way to these newer medias, like I said.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think marketing teams would absolutely love to go down that route, because for a number of reasons you've mentioned already. It's cheaper, it's easier, you get to build a connection. I think my experience is that if you mention TikTok to a lawyer, I think that a lawyer of a certain age, they would freeze in fear, and that would be as intimidating to them as the law firm, the law fairs are to you. So it's interesting, and I think actually, it's having that voice in the firm and being open to listen to the voices of the people that are coming in is really important. And it's something that I always try to do, because actually, it goes back to understanding your audience, and the audience for careers fairs is you. So it's, you're you and your peers are the people that should be the ones that are saying, actually, what, it would be much better if you had one of the partners talking to us through TikTok or talking to us through Instagram or whatever it is, because that's much more likely to engage with us. But as I said, I think what probably holds people back is that fear of looking silly or not knowing where to start, I think. Success. We've kind of been talking to various guests through this series, and success has been kind of a theme throughout, and kind of the conventional idea of success, and challenging that, I guess. Do you think that for you and for people that you're talking to, your kind of peers, is success for you still, we want to make partner at a city firm, or is that something slightly different now?
Good question. That's an interview style question. That is. I feel like I'm in the interview room again.
No pressure. There's no job at the interview.
Yeah, no, I won't lay out my criteria for partner yet. But no, I think the message that is often communicated to students at university is firstly it's barrister or solicitor. The emphasis on the vast array of other careers within the world of law and consulting, marketing, business development, all that other stuff is unfortunately underemphasized. And I think it's like 50% of students go into a law degree wanting to be barristers, and then at the end of it 50% of them aren't even doing legal careers. So I think that the fact that shows like Suits and the media and everything else has a huge influence on how people perceive success and how people perceive legal careers is quite evident. I think personally for me, I'm looking forward to practice. I think what really interests me is the fact that when you go from trainee to partner level, you shift your focus slightly away from actually doing the legal work and the nitty-gritty details down to the commercial side of things, and keeping clients happy and winning new clients and business development side of things. I think, at least in my admittedly limited exposure to law and everything else that I've been doing, I've really enjoyed that aspect. I've really enjoyed the element of commerciality and the business side to law that firms engage with, and the fact that they need to, win new clients and market themselves effectively and all that stuff. So certainly throughout my training contract and beyond, I'd love to get involved with all that kind of stuff that a firm can offer. But I kind of hesitate to put a label or a fixed goal of where I want to be in, say 10 years time, because I think, admittedly, if you'd have asked me where I wanted to be in a year's time 12 months ago, I certainly wouldn't have said doing the stuff I'm doing now. It probably would have been very different. And I think that just goes to show that I think you need to keep your ambitions just ahead of you, enough to stretch you in terms of your scope and what you're hoping to achieve, but I wouldn't keep them too fixed either. And instead I think it's much more effective to have a sort of overarching mission statement or values that guide you and that interest you, which will lead you towards some kind of endpoint or goal to work towards, rather than the other way around and trying to mold yourself to fit the shape of something along the way. Because ultimately, if you get there and you don't like it, then you've spent a lot of time fixating towards something which didn't resonate with you, really. So a bit of a half answer there, I'm afraid, but I think that's the best I can do, given that I'm sure if we had this conversation in 6 to 12 months, once I've got my foot in the door and actually started practicing, could be a very different thing indeed. And again, it goes back to the point of keeping an open mind and not bolting myself down too much to what I want to do just yet.
It's funny because I guess keep making me sound old. Ally McBeal was, I guess, the Suits of my day, and that was, I think, the thing people see and assume that that's what you're walking into. Are you going to carry on with podcasting, vlogging? Is that something that you're kind of going to keep doing?
Oh, I hope so. I think one of the reasons it doesn't actually make a lot of sense what I'm doing. If my core audience are students and people looking to break into law, and I'm primarily on a very student unfriendly platform, I guess is one way of saying it, which is LinkedIn. I think if I was wanting to be, having maximum effectiveness in my ability to reach students and convey to them in the medium and method that they would resonate with, like we kind of covered earlier, it would be something like YouTube or TikTok or anything else. But the reason I picked the blog and the podcast format was because I think it's something which will mature quite nicely alongside a legal career. And I'd already seen a lot of practicing lawyers participating in that kind of stuff anyway. And when I got this started, it was with the intention of keeping it going throughout my training contracts and beyond and everything else. And I'm hoping to do that. Admittedly, probably not at the pace I'm doing now. It might have to drop down to once a week or something like that. But I think for me, I wanted it to be an opportunity to document my conversations and experiences, both with other people, and then also my own reflections on what I'd been doing and my own experiences, because there's a lot of information about training contracts, just as a narrow example, that doesn't get communicated through to students and people looking to break into the profession. So the professional skills course, the PSC component that you do with the SRA, admittedly not a huge step in the process, but there were people in my cohort like this a month or two before we're about to start who didn't know what that was, and admittedly I'd only heard of it in reference. And it's one of those things that makes me scratch my head and go, okay, well why isn't this being promoted or marketed, or at least distributed to students as information that they would need to know about, because it is a component of what they're going to do, or how seat selection processes work, or what are the differences between all these different commercial law practice areas, and how do they differ between transactional versus litigious versus advisory kind of seats and work. So all that kind of information, which I think is really insightful and useful to students and will certainly inform them in their decision-making process. I hope to continue with me through the podcast and the medium of the blog as well, to be able to help people continue to learn more about the profession, and to, like I said, document the vast array of people which I'm sure I'll come into contact with once I enter the world of practice as well.
And what's the one thing, so there might be some partners listening, there might be some HR teams listening, what would be the one thing that you would say that they could be doing better to inform students and to try and attract students into their firms?
I think some of the ways that I've seen things just be most effective per se is not to necessarily go for methods of what I would call direct marketing, i.e. trying to espouse our firm is the best because XYZ, because there's a huge array of firms out there, and a lot of times students will feel they might be getting conflicting messages, and they might think two firms are incredibly similar, and it might be the case in reality that they are. But when it comes to them being able to kind of cut through everything they're being offered and being able to understand what a firm's truly about, it can be a little bit difficult. And I think some of the most effective ways I've seen people engage with firms and what they do and ultimately lead to them applying there is through what I would just call indirect, or that kind of content marketing. So actually just telling people what it is you do, giving you a real insight, the experiences of talking to partners, or like I said, all those other examples earlier of learning about those commercial law practice areas, and really getting an insight into what firms do, and if possible an ability to do it themselves through these sort of virtual experiences that we've seen cropping up as a result of coronavirus. Because I think ultimately that helps you twofold, because it helps your students and people who are going to apply and be more informed, and hopefully write better applications and be better lawyers and everything else that would come along with that increased exposure. But also it's the fact that when they go for these learning experiences, they know where they got them from, and if anything it's advantageous to the firms because they can give their own highlights, and they can sell some of their own USPs as that kind of secondary emphasis to all of that. So I think if firms really want to try and connect with people in a way which students will appreciate, and also be able to really understand and appreciate, and the fact that they'll hopefully apply there, I think it's just simply provide information in a way which is accessible, digestible, understandable, and one then thing just helps give some information provision and insight into what firms do.
That message probably is also true of firms and how they communicate with their clients, because the communication might be done in a slightly different way, but I think it echoes there of things that I hear from clients around knowing how to separate one firm from another. So Harry, thank you so much for joining me. It's been really interesting talking to you and finding out about where you are, and I wish you every success in your career.
That was Claire Rayson speaking to Harry Clark of the More From Law podcast. And it's well worth heading over to his podcast feed to see the other great content he has there. I do hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Lawyer's Coach. Series 2 starts on the 7th of September, so do look out for that. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.
Lawyer's Coach is brought to you by Client Talk and Hansard Coaching. If you're enjoying this series, please rate us on your podcast provider so that others can find us. If you're a lawyer and would like to take part in Lawyers Coach, please visit our website lawyercoach.co.uk for further details. And you can also join the conversation on our LinkedIn group Lawyers Coach. If there are any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, then just get in touch.